Thanks for joining us here on France 24. You were listening in there to these comments from the president of France and also the president of Angola. So Angola is a former Portuguese colony. Why did Macron decide to include it in his trip to Central Africa?
It's actually not surprising. Angola, as your report mentioned, is the largest oil producer now in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a country with huge economic potential. And actually, this follows a previous trip that Macron had done to Kenya, for example, again, partly focused on economic and development issues rather than politics. And so really Angola fits as part of that. Macron is actually trying to expand French strategy towards Africa away from the traditional very heavy focus on the Francophone countries to a much wider range of engagement right across the continent. So in that sense, it's quite logical, and it doesn't really surprise that France wants to get involved more strongly in Angola. It's a priority target partner for quite a few other external actors as well.
Well, so Macron says that France has no desire to return to the past policies of interfering in Africa. How do you think that message is going over so far during this visit?
Well, it depends on the country that you're in. I think in Angola, it's an easy message to sell because, of course, France wasn't the colonial power and France doesn't have any long tradition of engagement in Angolan politics. But that's a contrast with Gabon, the first stop on this regional tour, where there was in the past a very long tradition of close relationships between the regime, not just of the current president, Ali Bongo Ondimba, but his father, Omar Bongo, and members of the French political elite. And although Macron's visit there was focused on rainforest protection for a biodiversity conference, this is an election year in Gabon, and inevitably he faced questions and some degree of resentment from the Gabonese opposition, saying, "Is it appropriate to come to our country in an election year because that will be seen as signalling support for President Bongo?" And he will face the same challenge in the last stop on this tour in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where President Felix Tshisekedi is up for re-election later this year as well. But Macron's view is that he can't allow his whole strategy for the continent and his agenda of engagement to be overly constrained by elections that may be happening some months down the line. But of course, opposition groups in the countries concerned may not feel the same way.
Well, yes, in fact, there have already been protests in advance of Macron's visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo. What is behind the anti-French sentiment there?
Well, it's slightly paradoxical because France was not the colonial power in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's not one of the countries where traditionally France had been perceived as interfering very heavily in internal politics. So the resentment against France, the protests against France, there seem to have been stimulated, if you like, almost copycat manner by the wider mood of protest against France that we've seen, for example, in West African countries. But the political reasons why he wants to go now relate significantly to the crisis in the east of Congo that he mentioned in the press conference there in his remarks, because currently the M23 rebels whom Rwanda is accused of supporting are threatening the city of Goma in eastern Congo. Now, Macron's worked very hard to build good relations with Rwanda and move that connection on from the very bitter relations that were left in the aftermath of the 1994 genocide crisis. And so it's actually, from his point of view, quite important to also then go to Kinshasa, to Democratic Republic of Congo, and signal that France has good relations with both sides and is being even-handed in this crisis. And we noticed how much he declared a strong support for the Angolan initiative. Angola is one of the key mediators in an effort to try and find a solution to the crisis. So if he hadn't included Democratic Republic of Congo, Kinshasa, in his itinerary this time, then there probably would have been complaints that he was being partial to Rwanda. So it probably, despite the controversy over this being an election year, was something he felt absolutely had to be included in his trip.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow at the Africa Program at Chatham House.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us here.